Hunger is unconscionable. I think everybody in this room can agree with that. But it's not simply born out of a lack of food. If we're going to speak meaningfully about hunger or solutions to address hunger, we need to understand that the true causes of hunger include, on a global level, trade agreements and lack of purchasing power, or in normal parlance, the lack of funds, the lack of money to buy food. People are not going hungry simply because there's not enough food, because we live in the land of plenty. Here in the United States, we're throwing away more food than we're actually hanging on to in some instances. People are going hungry because they can't afford to buy it. If you think back to, some people also remember the Care commercials on television when I was growing up. I was born in 1970. And through the 70s and early 80s, there were these commercials that would come on, and they would talk to you about feeding starving children. During that same time, the world's farmers were producing 4 pounds of food per person per day. So in that time when we were talking about feeding the hungry, we actually could feed the hungry. The lack of ability to do that is a very recent phenomenon. Could you move to the next slide, please? People were and are hungry because they're too poor to buy food. Of the 925 million hungry people worldwide, which is 1 in 7 people on the planet, my homeland of India has the dubious distinction of having the highest number of hungry people on Earth and the greatest number of billionaires, according to Forbes magazine, their top billionaires list. The way we distribute food is not according to need, but according to the market. And as a result, those who are able to afford food are the ones who get to eat, while those who don't go hungry. Food prices are increased to a link in energy price increases. A 10% increase in crude oil prices is associated with an almost 3% increase in the World Bank Food Price Index. I wish you could see this slide. I will tell you about it. It shows the food share of the total expenditures of the world's poorest people. In the Kurz Republic, roughly, I'm looking at this bar graph, roughly 70% of someone's income goes towards buying food. In Sri Lanka, it's roughly 70%, Indonesia, Philippines, around the same amount. So here in the United States, that figure is significantly lower. I believe it's something closer to 16% of our budget is spent on food. But you can see what price volatility would do in places like this. If you can move to the next slide, please. These higher crude oil prices encourage the greater use of food products such as corn, vegetable oil, and sugar in the production of biofuels. In an April 2011 assessment, the United States Department of Agriculture reported that the use of corn for biofuels in the United States has increased from 31% of total corn output in 2008 and 2009, and is projected to increase to close to 50% in 2011 and 2012. This price volatility wreaks havoc on our food system, a system that you all know is now largely built on corn. If you can move to the next slide, please. So our reliance on a single crop makes us incredibly vulnerable. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s that wiped out up to a quarter of Ireland's population changed the Emerald Isles' history forever. But it started when the British took over Ireland's best farmland for beef grazing pasture, and it pushed the Irish onto marginal land where they became virtually dependent on the potato for survival. So the reliance on a single crop, the reliance on monocultures, makes us incredibly vulnerable. Today's rice crisis in Southeast Asia has disturbingly similar roots. And I'll read you a quote that you're not able to see from Devlin Kuyek, who wrote the book, Good Crop, Bad Crop, Seed Politics and the Future of Food. He explains a lot of diseases that had never been a problem started appearing during the Green Revolution. All of a sudden, instead of adapting seeds to local conditions, the farm had to be adapted to the seed variety. So this is an image here of wheat rot, and we're in real time having conversations. I follow the Kansas Wheat Board's work and looking at sort of wheat rust and what are the implications for some of the challenges that we face when we are, again, working with very limited crops within our agricultural system. One of the biggest byproducts of this is a tremendous loss of biodiversity. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says that 75% of crop varieties have disappeared since 1900. 9/10 of the world's calories now come from 20 crop species, with 4 making up our total calories: rice, corn, wheat, and potatoes. And if you can see nothing else, you can sort of see the shrinking of a lot of crops. Just within this century, well, within the last 100 years, we've seen a dramatic shift in this system. So in light of all this suffering to people and to the planet, again, one might think the best solution is genetically engineered food and seed. I humbly question this. Actually, sorry. The next slide. One company, as I mentioned, Monsanto, owns 70% of this world's seed market and 90% of all transgenic or genetically engineered seeds. The adoption of genetically engineered seeds in the United States is one of the reasons Monsanto is one of the top seed companies in the world. Monsanto has 647 biotech plant patents that impact, as I mentioned earlier, 85 to 90% of all soybeans, corn, cotton, sugar beets, and canola grown in the United States. Go to the next seed. Over its 110-year history, Monsanto has evolved from primarily an industrial chemical company into an agricultural products company. Genetically engineered technology has created greater market share for Monsanto's own chemical pesticides through the use of Bt and Roundup Ready seeds. So the seeds that they've created are seeds that require the use of their pesticides. So it creates a perfect system, a perfect economic system. Of course, what we have to ask ourselves is, does this create a perfect agricultural system? If you could go to the next slide. One of the ways that Monsanto has maintained a robust bottom line through this market downturn is through the use of patents. And farmers in the room know this much better than I do. Farmers who avail of these seeds are required to sign seed contracts on an annual basis to plant the seeds. We have to eat. It's not unreasonable for a company to want to recuperate the costs on the investment that they have made in technology. But an important question to ask ourselves is, what are they building upon? The modifications that they're doing are on single strands of DNA, as I mentioned earlier, that's built upon a food system that God created, that we supported, that we have developed together. But now, through the use of seed patents, a single company is saying, we own these seeds now. And if you wish to use our seeds, then you can't save them, and you need to sign contracts for them every year. If you can move to the next slide. The nature of a seed, as every farmer in this room knows, is to drift. If we're trying to protect ourselves because of food allergies, if we're trying to keep ourselves from certain foods because of dietary observations, we no longer can in this kind of a food system. I want you to think back to what I said about the tomato fish, or the fish tomato. If you are avoiding fish for dietary reasons, for whatever the reason may be, and you have a seed that's genetically engineered with this fish in it, and it drifts onto another person's land, which is, again, it's the nature of the seed to drift, you no longer have control over what you're able to put into your body, and you no longer have the ability to adhere to your religious observances or to protect yourself from those allergens. The practice for time immemorial has been for farmers to save seeds. I remember my grandmother wasn't a farmer, and she still saved seeds. Seeds for her garden, year after year, seeds that she had gotten from her neighbors, and seeds that I surreptitiously stuck into my luggage and brought back to America, even though I wasn't supposed to, because they were my grandmother's seeds. And I just wanted to keep them. I didn't put them in the ground, I just kept them. But seeds are sacred. And now I'm going to tear up because it breaks my heart that seeds are now patented. Patent laws undermine the right of farmers to save their seeds. I can't believe I'm really going to get emotional. I don't even farm. One of the touted advantages of patented seeds is a reduced need for labor, which is in fact disadvantageous when it's applied to developing countries. So what I'm trying to lay out for you are the mess of contradictions that are involved in what seems like a very clear marketing message when you hear it from a company that has a vested interest in selling the seeds. we're feeding people. All right, well, if you're feeding people, then why aren't the seeds available in all these other countries, and what evidence do we have of that? We're reducing the use of pesticides. Okay, then why does your website say now the increased use of pesticides is causing super weeds and super pests? There are contradictions here that cause me to ask questions that I hope, again, we'll all ask together. Monsanto has sued 144 farmers in the United States for patent violations. And I'll tell you, this image is from a lawsuit that was generated by OSCATA, which is the Organic Seed and Trade Association. I might have messed up that acronym, versus Monsanto. It was an aggregation of farming and seed organizations that represented over 330,000 farmers. And it was held, the suit was filed at the New York Supreme Court. The court actually just a couple of weeks ago turned it down, but the premise is still the same and the challenges are still the same. What the court said, and it's actually a very fair assessment, that you don't have any proof that this has happened, but what OSCATA and all these other farmers are saying is you've sued 144 farmers, but the echo effect of that is much greater, and a lot of us are scared. And we're scared to grow organic crops because we don't think that we can keep them pure. We're scared that when you are going to find your seed on our farm because the seed drifts, that you're going to come after us. And we don't have the resources to fight you, Monsanto. So that suit is now being revised. But that's sort of what the heart of that suit is about, and what the heart of those challenges are for farmers, for those farmers. Because of the challenges, as I've laid out, of seed drift and of cross-pollination, Monsanto is also conducting research, this is the solution to the problem, into GERTS, which is genetic use restriction technology. The layperson's term for that is terminator technology. It allows the crops to grow normally and set seed, but the seed doesn't germinate because the development of the embryo is arrested. It's not being distributed right now, these terminator seeds, but the research has continued. I agree with Anuradha Mittal from the Oakland Institute, who says, the fact that those in power can control nature to the degree that they dictate whether or not a seed is fertile is sheer arrogance. It is ethically, economically, socially, and politically wrong, and there's no way about it. Go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to end by addressing two final points. In regards to, again, whether or not these seeds are feeding the World Bank and the United Nations funded 900 scientists over 3 years to create an international assessment of agricultural knowledge, science, and technology for development, IAASTD. Its conclusion is, and I'm semi-quoting here, is the use of genetically modified crops is not a meaningful solution to the complex situation of world hunger. IAASTD suggests that rather than pursuing industrial farming models, agroecological methods provide the most viable means to enhancing global food security, especially in light of climate change. These include implementing practical, scientific research based on traditional seed varieties and local farming practices adapted to the local ecology over millennia. So what they are suggesting is let farmers do what they know how to do, support small-scale farming, and please don't move toward this single bullet solution. The current genetically modified crops that we have generally increased yields over a short term, but over the long run have not done that, despite their increased costs and dependence on agricultural chemicals. And you can read more about this in the 2009 Union of Concerned Scientists report, Failure to Yield. The second point that I'd like to highlight is that seed companies maintain that genetically engineered seeds are safe. What gives me pause is the May 2011 article in the peer-reviewed academic journal Reproductive Toxicology. It was the first to highlight the presence of pesticides associated with foods genetically engineered to tolerate various herbicide and insecticides in pregnant and non-pregnant women. One of the reasons that we continue to maintain that these seeds are safe is because there haven't been human trials on them. So what we have found in a number of studies that have been done on animals is problems to the digestive tract. And what companies then respond and say is like, well, they're fed massive amounts of those foods, so we can't really make that correlation. This is the first study that's been done that shows one thing that we now know for sure, which is that 3-MPPA, the metabolite of glufosinate, which is the primary ingredient in Roundup, and Cry1AB, which is the primary ingredient that ends up in Bt-resistant crops, is that those toxins were clearly detectable and appeared to cross the placenta to the fetus. The